The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bitten by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André. I will be your podcast host, and big thanks to Ookla the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in once again to another fun-filled, action-packed, two-fisted 2024 edition of the show. This is the first episode of Season 5, in which I speak with Alex Robinson. Now, Alex was a big deal to me growing up. He was kind of my entryway into independent comics. I had read an article about his comic Box Office Poison and Wizard. We do discuss that in the episode, about how that had helped get some attention towards his book, and went off from there. Alex, super cool guy, kind of felt like one of those kindred spirit talks where him and I had a lot in common, a lot of similar opinions and views on life and the world, and a lot of great chats. I did not know going into this conversation about his wildly popular podcast, and I'm very excited to get into that and check it out. It seems like I have a lot of episodes to listen to, but it's going to be pretty cool. I'm excited to listen and tune into that, which and that seems to have been great for him. Seems to be a new avenue for him as well, as he seems to be shifting out of doing narrative graphic novels in the way he's been doing them, and going into more of an artistic way of going and writing as well, which we discuss in the episode. But great chat, guy who really, his comics really spoke to me growing up, and the themes within them of every version of his books have appealed to me at whatever time in my life I was reading them, which is rare. With you find those artists that you like, that it seems like maybe they were growing along with you, and that when they were encountering all the parts of life that you did and having stories about them and making commentary about them, they're just appealing to you in the perfect way, because you were just hitting all those milestones yourself as you were reading them. And Alex was one of those for me, so I was very lucky to have him come on the show, and very excited about it as well. I hope your new year was good. I hope I know I said I hope Santa found you in the previous episode. I hope the New Year's baby found you, I guess. Is that what we do during New Year's? I don't know. Hopefully you had a good New Year's Eve, spent it with special people, and that special someone got a kiss under the at the midnight, if that's your thing. If not, just hope you had fun. Hope you had a good time, and I hope you're ready for a great year. I know I am. I think I am going to turn the show into a weekly show. I know I discussed that in the last episode, and I guess I should have just announced it then because I was thinking about it. But I guess the time has come. I am quite busy. I guess I could always change it later if I want to. But I do have a bevy of guests coming, and so much so that I think it's time to make it weekly. So I'm going to do that. So this episode will be the first episode of 2024. When you're listening to it, it should be on January 8th, as I think that's when the times line up. So because of that, our next episode will be next week on the 15th, and I'll announce that guest at the end of the show. Just a little something to sweeten the pot, a lovely gift to give you at the end of listening to this wonderful, wonderful show. As far as what's going on with me during the little break I had over the holidays, I try to catch up on a few things. I know my life has changed a little bit in that I work only for myself now, which is great. I have a lot more time to kind of do some extracurricular activities. I'm kind of punched that 9 to 5 clock, which has been good as well. But I've also still been quite busy, and it's hard to keep on top of all the various things I do, plus work, plus stuff for my clients when they need it, and so on and so forth. It adds up. But one thing that's great is I've been able to start doing full workouts at the gym. I used to do cardio in the morning when I woke up, and then try to squeeze the weights in on my lunch hour at my previous job. But now I get to kind of go do it all at once, which means I kind of spend more time at the gym, fortunately. But I do get to catch up on some shows, and I get to watch some while I'm working as well. So because of it, I've caught up on a few things that I've been lacking on. One thing that I finally watched season 2 of Invincible, which I love dearly. I mean, I love that show. It's a perfect representation of why every comic should be adapted this way. Like, if there's any comics out there you think, well, it might be tough to adapt in live action, make it animated. Invincible is killing it. It's an amazing homage to the original source material, but also a great show in its own right. But one thing I did watch was the Scott Pilgrim show on Netflix, the animated show, which goes wildly in a different direction than what I expected based on everything else. I just kind of assumed it was another adaptation of the original graphic novels, which it is to a point, but I don't want to reveal too much, but it does take a hard turn in a different direction in the first episode and gives you a completely new narrative and a whole other way of looking at the story and these characters and a beautiful story in itself. It seems like there's going to be more. I really hope there is. I loved it. The soundtrack's fantastic. The voice acting is all the original voice actors from the live action movie, which I love dearly as well. So it's a great way to get more Scott Pilgrim, but not just tread the same ground we've tread a few times with the video game and the cartoon and the movie. So yeah, check it out. I highly, highly suggest it. It's beautiful. Also, check out X-Rated, the X-Men Anime Review Show, which me and my partner, also the producer of this show, Davin, work together to watch all the old episodes of the X-Men cartoon from the 90s. We have reached the end of that show. We're now kind of waiting for the next show to start. And in the meantime, we're interviewing people that were involved with the show. We're watching the movies, the X-Men movies, and doing a few little side journeys into the video games and some seminal comic books. So really just celebrating X-Men over there right now. We're waiting for the new show to start. So check that out as well. And what you should also check out is this episode, because I think it's time we get into it. So this is my chat with Alex Robinson, the creator of Box Office Poison. Enjoy.
Hello.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Good. Happy to be here. So, is this a video show or is this just
It's just audio. Yeah.
Okay, good. Doesn't matter what's behind.
So you can leave your
right.
pants off if you want. It's fine.
Okay, well, I was going to insist on that, so I'm glad that's the policy. Is my sound okay? Am I loud enough?
Oh, you sound great. That's fantastic.
Okay,
yeah.
good. All right, good.
Awesome.
All right.
I love your backdrop. That's fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, that's for the podcast.
Yeah, that's right. I guess that is just for
YouTube
us.
too.
Yeah, we should talk about how great it is for a while, just so the audio audience can really just be jealous.
Yeah, I'll describe it in great detail.
Yeah, every single Star Wars character from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, thanks so much for being on, Alex. This is honestly, I don't want to fanboy too much on you because I'm sure you get that a lot, but I'm a big fan of your work, and it's kind of surreal to me to be talking to you right now. So this is really cool.
No, I'm happy to be here.
Where are you at? Where are you located?
I live in Portland, Oregon.
Ah, the fun Portland.
Yeah, used to be.
Well, that's the Portlandia Portland, isn't it? So
yeah, now we're in the post-pandemic Portland. It's the tone is slightly changed.
Did you feel like Portlandia nailed the feeling of living in that area, or is it just sort of?
Well, shamefully, I am part of the westward expansion that happened as a result of Portlandia. People who lived in Portland hated when Portlandia came out because then it made everyone move to Portland, and it totally destabilized the economy and
that's amazing.
Too much traffic and all that stuff like that. Yeah,
I did not know that. So Portlandia actually made an influx of people wanting to move to Portland.
Yeah, well,
wow.
I mean, it was probably combined with some other things too. It was just in the zeitgeist, I guess, or whatever. But people in Portland do not, they don't enjoy the show. They're just like, oh, it's just like,
Fred Armisen's just tending his fingers somewhere, laughing maniacally, like.
Go in Austin.
Yeah, that's true. That's the other one. Could be the sequel series. But some friends of mine and I always quote that, especially there's like this couple that are at a restaurant and they're trying to figure out if the chicken is cruelty free or whatever, and then you need like the dossier. And when they're just sort of explaining how like worldly they are, one of them says, "Well, I've been to Ecuador, so I think I need to see." So, and my friend, my wife's friend that she grew up with is quite the world traveler. And she's been to Ecuador, so I constantly like, "Well, you've been to Ecuador, so like you're the expert on this now." Mm-hmm. Was Portland always home?
No, I moved here in 2016.
Oh,
I lived in New York City my entire adult life, and got to the age where I'm like, do I want to live in this one city for my entire life, And I said, no, I don't. I want to at least try something different one time. And I'd visited Portland a few times. My brother lives out here, and it seemed like a cool place to go. And then Portlandia made it look so awesome that I just couldn't stay away. I mean, it just seemed so quirky and fun.
Kyle McLaughlin's the mayor and just seems so nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's really cool. I guess as far as like traveling from a major city like New York to a place like Portland would be quite a culture shock, I would imagine. I guess if you're kind of living a bohemian-y, hipstery lifestyle already in the place you're at, moving to a place that kind of embraces that would sort of be a nice coming home, as it were.
I think we pretty much stuck with the same brand we were in Manhattan, just got like the version of it that's, we didn't want to live in an apartment building because we already had lived in one. What's the point of that? So we live in a townhouse, which is as close as you can get to an apartment building and still be in a home. So,
but you're allowed to say it's different though. So
yeah, but I never owned a car till we moved out here, till I was 48 years old or whatever it was. So
that's
crazy.
Amazing. Yeah, I guess in New York you wouldn't have much need for it. I've only visited there once on a stopover from Vegas, but it was a nice experience. It's the one thing I'll say about New York when I was there anyways, it doesn't matter what time of day it is or night it is, it never stops. Like you could be there like 3 a.m. it just feels like it's the middle of the day. Like
there's always something happening.
There's always throngs of people. It's crazy.
That's the crazy thing about moving here. It's like, living in New York, we're used to going out to dinner at like 9:30 at night, and then here it's like, the restaurants are closing at 9 o'clock at night on on weeknights. We're like, oh my gosh, just such a different.
Yeah, but dynamic. I live in Nova Scotia in a town called Truro, which is just about an hour from Halifax, if you know where that is, and
roughly.
Yeah, it's the capital. So so if you like, and here it's very much like that as well. It's probably like a scaled down version of that, but in the way that most of the restaurants close at 10. It just seems like a slower way of living, which kind of is okay with me.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm like, why do you need to be able to eating at midnight? I don't know, eat at home.
Yeah. That's why we moved out of New York, because we wanted something different. Now we go to sleep at like 9:30 at night.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Get up with the roosters at the crack of dawn and piling wood and doing all the farm chores, that sort of stuff. No, that's very cool. So growing up in New York, you said you had a brother. Did you have any other siblings?
Nope, just him, me and my brother and our parents.
And yeah, what was life like that? Were comics always a part of your life growing up, or?
No, I from the time I was a kid, I could always, I always enjoyed drawing, and I guess had a talent for it. I don't know if I had a talent for it or I just enjoyed it, so I just became good at it, over time. But in any case, and so I always knew I wanted to do something with art. But when I was a kid, I was like, do I want to do like animation or like, comic strips or like there's other things, other forms I was interested in. But then I guess when I was around 12 or 13, I started reading superhero comics, Marvel superhero comics at first. And once I started getting into comics, and especially independent comics, once I kind of discovered the world beyond just what superhero comics were, that was when I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. I want to be a comic book artist. And
do you remember what? I was going to say, do you remember what the one was, like the first independent comic that led you into the dark future that is independent comics?
It was probably, there was kind of what was called middle ground books. They weren't quite underground and they weren't quite mainstream. They were kind of like, it was stuff like ElfQuest and Cerebus and those kind of books, which were kind of like the early roots of like independent comics, that what would become that. So it was probably one of those, because in the 80s there were a bunch of those small companies starting up, like First Comics, Eclipse Comics. There was a whole raft of other small publishers that
that was a kind of a golden era. I fell hard into ElfQuest as well, and Gru, I think, started that way. It eventually went to Marvel for a bit and then went to Dark Horse, I think, where it's at now. But Gru was like an epic or one of those as well for a while. Usagi Jimbo, all those sort of things sort of started coming out that were like just so different and wild. It's funny that you mentioned the sort of finding your your thing that gets you into independent comics. In my previous episode of the show, I talked with Joe Eisner, who did Morning Glories. He was the artist on that series. And we're talking about this, and it's funny because during our conversation, I said that mine was Box Office Poison.
Oh, wow.
And that's what, when we talked about you for a while about how much we liked your work. And then I thought, I'm just going to reach out to him and see if I could get him on the show. So it was very happenstance and cool that you're available to come on. So yeah, no, it was through Wizard, I think. Wizard did a whole expose on
that
your
article.
book.
Yeah, that article expose. Yeah, the article totally saved my skin. I mean,
Really?
Yeah, people give Wizard a lot of grief, but for no matter what else happened, they totally, because my series was coming out, and the first issue, it was the time where a first issue would do okay, which was like 3,000 copies or something, and then after that, it just started going down, and luckily, Buddy Scalera, who was a writer for Wizard, stumbled across the book and kind of plugged it. It was a huge, like 4-page article.
It was massive, and it made it sound like the coolest book you're not reading. And as a kid, I think I was probably 11 or 12 when I read that. I was probably
yeah. I could totally see my work being that kind of thing, where if you're into superhero comics, but you want something that's more story based, or you want something that's not like highbrow necessarily, like the kind of other alternative books. Anyway, yes, I'm glad to hear I was that book for you, or I apologize for being.
No, it was great, especially because it was like right around that time where you're starting to. I think it's around that sweet spot when you're a kid that you discover like Clerks and like movies that don't seem like the kind of movie that you've been watching your whole life. Like, you watch that and you're like, what the hell is this? And this isn't like, there aren't dinosaurs in an amusement park here. I don't know what I'm watching, and then you realize like there's some magic to it. Maybe it's because it's something you haven't seen before. Maybe it's just so close to real life. And as a kid, you don't watch movies that really remind you of life. And even that one was probably like a bit ahead of me because I hadn't all the experiences that probably come with, the people that would really be hitting with. But it was just discovering this world of like stuff that is accessible and fun, but not necessarily, but seems more like it's your own because you discovered it and you get to introduce other people to it,
Yeah, I'm curious if that experience still exists in digital world, you know what I mean? Where there's so many ways, so many different subcultures, and so many instant ways of discovering a lot about obscure topics, and it's totally different,
Yeah, it's like a listicle that says here's the top 10 movies you've never seen before, and you're like, oh, I gotta watch all these, like that. I don't see those so much for comics. It seems like even comic news is generally like most of the mainstream stuff, sadly, still. But
well, comics are a weird industry. I mean, I'm very curious as to what's going to happen in 10 years or whatever, if they're just going to become all digital, if people are still always going to be like floppies just keep getting more and more expensive, and the number of people buying them just seems to get smaller and smaller.
Yeah, so, even as an adult who has a decent job and has I literally picked up my comics today. It was this comic shop in Halifax called Strange Adventures, and it's not a huge stack of comics, but it's one that's probably a few months worth, and it was like $200. So it's like it adds up. It's crazy. It's like, well,
I mean, especially when you're competing with like video games and stuff, like
movies. You can watch
comics are really niche. Like you really have to be into comics to really kind of. It's a hard thing to be casually into, I think, because it's so expensive, and and it's so dense with.
I think I want to try to lean more towards like buying physical copies for like the indie books that I like, and then like the Marvel stuff, I'll just read Marvel Unlimited or one of those ones. I might still buy Spider-Man because I've always been a big Spider-Man person, but aside from that, I think I might drift away from it just because this is too much. It's also room, like now that I'm close to 40, I'm 38, and like I have stacks and stacks of comic boxes. It's like I don't want to pile more of those on in the next 40 years, like. Hopefully. So, so, okay. So when, when did you start drawing? Was it like a high school thing? When did you get to the point that you're like, I'm going to make comics now?
That was probably, I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I started doing my own, superhero comics on lined paper. I would use an erasable ballpoint pen to draw them and just, making it up as I was going. And then I would photocopy them and give them to my friends, very primitive version of making your own comics. But,
nice.
It's definitely a learning experience. And, Malcolm Gladwell says it takes 10 years. You have to do something for 10 years to
Mm.
become
Like
really good at it.
10,000
So
hours or whatever they say.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
by the time I got to art school, I'd already been drawing comics for myself for years already, not
Mm.
like a huge massive output, but just thinking of stories. I would just I had like a whole kind of ongoing comic series in my head where I would just draw out the characters and things that were happening to them and their growth. And I was
Yeah.
describing it to someone over time and they were like, it's so weird because he felt like he had seen it after we described him the story and
Yeah.
stuff. And so, that's a funny,
As
I would feel like I've always been drawn to storytelling and,
as a kid, I find like I had a very similar track. Like I feel like I would just create these backstories that were elaborate and long and plans for stories that would be years to take over that, would probably never, and if you don't write them down and actually like plot out this becoming a thing. I mean, you obviously are a fan of long form storytelling because some of your books are bigger ones. But no, that's the beauty of the creative process is getting into that on that level. So that's cool. So what was art school like? Like, I love your art style, but I probably can't imagine it's
thanks.
like the thing that would be super conventional walking into art school. Were they like welcoming or?
Well, yes and no.
Mhm.
Since then, I think since with the rise of the graphic novel boom and stuff, from my understanding now, art school like SVA, School of Visual Arts, where I went in New York City, is a very different cartooning department. At the time, the cartooning department was mostly just like, we're preparing you to apply for a job at Marvel or DC Comics. Like that is the most financially sound thing you can do as a cartoonist. So therefore that's what you're going to school for. There was kind of it was kind of like a burgeoning manga. That was starting to happen, and so there were other influences going on besides Marvel and DC. But
Was it called the cartooning department?
Well, it was the illustration department, and cartooning was a major within the illustration
No,
department.
I was impressed. Most people do not refer to it as cartooning anymore, which I kind of sort of miss that. I feel like, it seems like cartoonists had like as a job title had a long storied history. So I kind of
I still would refer myself as a cartoonist. I mean, what is the alternative? Comic book artist?
Yeah, graphic artist.
Yeah. And plus, if you write and draw, you do both tasks. So you're not just. So what do you say? I write and draw comic books. Why don't you say cartoonist? It's just
fair point. I feel like Chris Ware and people like that still refer to themselves in that way, and he's got a very unique sort of, similar style. So very cool.
And I also think the comics industry is different. Like, I have a theory where regular people like cartoony art, whereas superhero people they want it to be as realistic as possible, and they don't like cartoony stuff in it because that makes it seem like it's for kids, and these superhero comics are not for kids. So, but I feel like if you look at the most popular cartoon characters, Snoopy and Garfield and all these different characters, they're very simply drawn. They're easy to simply capture, in a thing. So anyway,
that's actually quite interesting. I always for some reason that reminded me of Bone, because the three Bone characters are incredibly simple and iconic in their simplicity, but like the world around them, which is supposed to be more serious and scary, is more detailed. With the way the art styles are, but I never thought about it that way, but that's true. There is this sort of weird, like, I find comic fans, I was actually this conversation the other day interesting in the way that like they're so diverse in their opinions, and you can't nail down any one comic fan having any certain opinion on any certain way anything is, but there's this dogmatic way that they have about them. Like they'll find their own little tribe, and this is the way comics should be, and that's the tribe that agrees with that. But it's like, it's such a diverse medium. Like, why can't it just be everything? Like, why can't you just embrace everything and just stay in your thing and let those people enjoy that thing? It's very strange.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if how the new generation, if that's how that is because again, we lived in a pre-internet age where there was a lot of kind of like a gatekeeping quality to a lot of things, and obviously the internet still loves gatekeeping, and but luckily there's no way you can still enjoy something even if other people don't like the fact that you enjoy it. I mean, obviously unless they're harassing you or something, that's a totally different matter.
People do.
That does happen,
people very much do.
Ridiculous. People getting mad because of other people's opinions about Spider-Man or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
I was talking to someone about Star Wars the other day. The same
Degraded
thing.
age we were in.
I know it's like, yeah, like even to me, the idea that like if you would have told me, people would be having these conversations. Like on a grand scheme, you would see like thousands of people arguing with each other about opinions on Star Wars movies because we have so many Star Wars movies now. We can have opinions about the different ones and the people that make them. And it's like we were kids, you got like the Generation X made for TV movie and like the Batman movie and the Tim Burton Batman movies and then like the old Superman movies, and that's about it. Eventually we got X-Men and Blade, and then all the superhero stuff started coming. But to have and Star Wars was only the 3 movies that came out before. Like it was just such a desert of content if you're really a nerd. But now it's like so broad, and now it's so popular that people, everyone's in the conversation now, not just the nerds anymore. It's people that like movies, people that are involved with filmdom, people that are involved with all that sort of stuff, toy companies, everything else, cartoons. Like it's just so broad and wide now. Everyone's got these crazy opinions. But yeah, you're right. Everyone's trying to hold on to their weird little nostalgia island and not let anybody touch it or change it or change the memory or mar the memory of it.
Yeah, and it's also, I guess it became more with the internet. It became possible to be a fan of something as like a lifestyle choice. Like when we enjoyed Star Wars when I was 13 years old, be like, yeah, Star Wars. Everyone would talk about it while it was out. You'd buy some toys, and then eventually something else would come along. You'd put your Star Wars toys away and play with G.I. Joe and other stuff. And it was just kind of like but now I guess, especially now that the companies know they can market this love, is you can just be participating in Star Wars. And obviously now it's constant, like it never gets a chance to kind of lay fallow. So like I think people don't understand what it was like before this phenomenon thing of like even something that like the fandom of something would live on long after. And I guess that was true in science fiction and other cult circles, but now people still talking about the X-Files, a show that was on 30 years ago. And like, oh, we should bring that back. And, like it's weird.
Even just like how upset people got when like Marvel took over and they were like, Star Wars were like, okay, well, we're going to do our own Star Wars stories. So all of the old books don't count anymore. People are like lost their minds. They're like, this is my canon. This is the Boba Fett I want. This is the whatever. I want this Shadows of the Empire story, and I want that Dark Empire story, all those old DC Dark Horse comics and all the books. And it's like people just got super passionately upset about it to the point, and this is where I feel like fandom, and we don't get into a whole conversation about where fandom goes crazy, but everybody in their own head has the idea of what they want things to be. You're like, it'd be so cool if this guy did this thing and then that guy turned out to be this guy's dad, and then when it doesn't happen, they just are more disappointed, so they can't enjoy what they're seeing. So like I feel like with Star Wars specifically, because people are like, I didn't like the Boba Fett movie or show because he's supposed to be a bounty hunter, and it's like, well, we already have a Mandalorian bounty hunter in the other show. Like they did something different with him. Why not? It's like, well, that's not the way it is in the books. It's like, well, that doesn't matter. Like the only experience you have with Boba Fett, you should, based on the canon they're giving you, is his tiny appearance in Empire and then Return of the Jedi. So
that is true. Yeah, that does also not excuse the fact that there are other flaws in the Boba Fett.
No. I'm not forgiving. I'm not.
Okay,
that was just an example. So it's kind of the same with everything else, but it just seems like nobody's accepting of anything new because they want the story they've already built in their head, and they're just disappointed when they're not getting it.
I wouldn't say nobody. I would say it's a small but audible, loud minority of people.
That's very true.
Most people just don't care. Most people are like, oh, wow, a new Ghostbusters, huh? Maybe I'll go see that. And then they move on. They're not like, I want to sign a petition to change the director. Most people don't care. So it's...
That's the part that makes me laugh, too, about those people that are like circulating a petition to make the last Star Wars. I'm just using, like, I seems like I'm all in on Star Wars. That's just what's in my head for, like, the analogies I'm using. But when people are like passing around like a petition that's like, we're going to get the last Star Wars movie written out of canon, it's like, who's going to entertain that? You could, you're going to go to Disney and be like, look, 1,000 people signed this petition, and they're going to be like, all right, we're going to wipe out and totally erase this movie that cost.
All right, well, it's 1,000 people said it. I mean,
Joe from Phoenix, Arizona. Oh, Jesus. Okay, well, let's wipe this out. It is a weird time because like fandom can reach the things that they like so much easier than you could in the past. Like you couldn't
Oh
really
yeah,
touch or make
it's
an
much more of
impact.
it's a much more interactive relationship than it was
Yeah.
in the, it's like where they present something to you and you either like it or don't like it, and then you know
Yeah, you just
yeah,
didn't
people
watch it if
would
you didn't
write,
like it. But now you
yeah,
have
or
some. Now you can actively get a group of your friends together and just like bomb it on,
yeah.
Rotten Tomatoes or something.
I'm
But
just what surprises me is that, and I guess this will happen eventually, is why movie studios are resisting that. I
Hmm.
guess like eventually AI will be like, okay, this is the perfect thing that will satisfy all the internet nerds, and they'll just use that template as a forever, you know what I mean? And so
Yes,
maybe they'll
that's
get like they're gonna get to that point where it's like, okay, this is what has shown to be put, it's like marketing to its finest degree.
and I
Like,
want to say that wouldn't make them like that shouldn't be the way it is, but most of them would be happy with that. They'd be like, all right, there's nothing new here. I'm not being challenged. I'm not asked
yeah,
to
well then they'd
to
be mad
really
about
think
that.
about it.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
I
But
want something different but the same. That's basically the paradox at the heart of
yeah.
fandom.
No,
Not different that way, different a different way, but the same in a different way.
exactly. I always use that as like, well, once again back to Star Wars, but just like when people are like the Force Awakens, like I don't like it. It's too much like the old stuff. And they're like, okay, here's the Last Jedi. They're like, I don't like this. It's wildly different than any of the other stuff. And then they're like, well, here we're gonna try to mismatch those two together and do a third one that makes everyone happy. Like we really hate this. It's
Yeah,
inconsistent and
yeah.
totally all over the place. And you're like, like these executives must be driving themselves nuts trying to do backflips to please everybody. Just it's never going to happen.
I mean, if you had told people before The Mandalorian came out, like, oh, guess what? We're doing a series about Boba Fett carrying around a baby Yoda everywhere, people would have been like, that is the worst idea I've ever heard in my entire life. And everyone loves it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then everyone's like, we want a Boba Fett series, an Obi-Wan series. We want an Obi-Wan series. And then they give it to him, and everyone's like, oh, that was terrible. You know what I mean?
What could they
You
have done? What could that
can't
story have
please. You
been?
can't.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know.
So
It's
anyway,
it's mad. But all right. So when you
correct. Yeah. Yeah.
finally started making the books, where was the first
Mhm.
step? Like what was your first book, I guess, that got out there?
Well, when I was after I graduated from art school, I was like, well, I guess now I got to put my money where my mouth is and actually try to make a living doing this stuff. And while working a day job, I would put together mini comics. I would basically come up with 20 pages of comics, Xerox them, fold them, and staple them together. At the time, that was kind of a burgeoning if like Marvel was the big leagues and then independent comics were the minor leagues, this is like the farm leagues for the minor
Like the
leagues,
zine community kind of thing?
yeah, exactly. It's
Okay,
kind of
cool.
related to that. And at the time, a bunch of people had come out of that scene, Chester Brown and
No.
that couple of other
Really?
people.
He started in the scene. That makes sense. Makes
Oh
perfect
yeah,
sense.
totally. Yeah. So, and to me, that seemed like a good cheap way of getting your stuff out there. And, there's obviously people who were into that, you'd mail them to each other and stuff. It was adorable. And, so, it felt like a long time at the time, but 2 years later, 2 years of doing that, every time I would come out with an issue, I would send it off to, the publishers, and most of them would not respond, but occasionally I get rejection letters. But eventually a company called Antarctic Press said, oh, we're interested in this, and we want you to basically start reprinting it as a series.
So that was Box Office Poison? That was
That was
what you're
Box Office
saying?
Poison.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'd started doing mini comics, and I'd come up with the title of Box Office Poison as a sort of one-man anthology idea, which was kind of something that was also being done. Dan Clow's 8 Ball is probably the
Mhm.
famous example of like a one person doing several different stories. And it wasn't a good fit for me. And then I said, well, I follow the adage of write what you would want to read.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? What kind of stories do you enjoy reading? And I, liked stories about like, personal relationships and real life type stories. And so that's what I did. I started, coming up with, I guess, vaguely thinly veiled autobiography, and, kind of went from there.
So were the characters like, I guess using Box Office Poison since we're at that point in your life. Before I get to that, I guess, how did your folks feel about the path to art school and all that sort of stuff?
They were not happy about it.
Yeah, it's rare that I hear people say they are.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But I was a very bad student in high school,
Oh,
just
really?
barely graduated.
Oh,
And
okay.
I was like, if I'm going to go to college, I want to go to art school. And my parents were like, well, based on your high school grades, and art school is not cheap. So we want to make sure you're going to be a good student.
Mhm.
And so if you spend a year at like a real college, then we'll,
Oh, nice.
pay
Well, that
for
was
your
forward
art
thinking of them.
school. So yeah, I fulfilled it. And so I'm very grateful to them for doing that.
Awesome. Well, I
Even
noticed
though I
that.
don't think they ever quite got it, but they were at least like, okay, it seems to be what makes them happy. So there you go. So,
Well, your folks, you mentioned that you were happy for a while with your parents for a while, so they
yeah.
split up, I guess, when you were younger.
Yeah, when I was about 10 years old, my parents got divorced. Then my mom remarried, so I kind of grew up. I had a stepfather growing up, but
Mhm.
and he was then my family. But
Was your dad part of the picture as well, or?
yeah, he was involved, and we had a kind of complicated relationship. But you know how it is, fathers and sons, right?
I don't, sir. No, I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
okay.
No, I'm 100%. 100%.
Oh,
No, I'm kidding. I've never heard of this before in my life. No, I 100% understand that for sure. My folks are still together, but when I was a kid, dad was one of these people that, like, my dad was from the generation that's like, you work in the woods or on a roof building a house, and you did that until you just retired and then died. And usually you
Right,
don't really
okay.
retire, you just keep working until you die.
Yeah,
So
you die in a saddle.
yeah, exactly.
harness.
So, and he's like 70 something now and still kind of living that lifestyle, although I think he's
Mhm.
heading towards realizing he's got to slow down a bit. But as a kid,
Yeah.
he just never understood anything I was into. So, like,
Yeah.
never understood anything sci-fi, never understood comics, never understood anything like that. He would watch cowboy movies until the end of time, and that would make him happy. So, I definitely get that strange, not strange, but that father-son dynamic,
Sure.
and especially if you don't
Yeah.
connect on that level. So,
Yeah, I remember at one point my friends and I were into playing Hero Clicks, the
Mm.
collectible
I
strategy
was too at
game.
one point. Yeah, I played those.
And we were in our late 30s, early 40s at the time, and we're all setting it up and stuff and I was like, can you imagine our dads doing this when they were our age? Like, it's impossible to imagine. Like,
Yeah.
like imagining
Oh,
Don
yeah.
Draper arguing over, whether you have line
Of
sight or
sight. Yeah.
not.
That is awesome. Yeah. Even just seeing, like, because, I even walking into a comic store now, there are guys that are like in their 50s, 60s setting up like Warhammer figures or play magic cards, and you're like you're old enough to be like probably my dad, and you're out here just arguing with a 10-year-old about some rule in the show that you're playing. It's so funny. But yeah, you're right. I could not imagine it. I remember the closest I ever got him in anything nerdy was I put on Predator, which was essentially an action movie, but at some point you have to reconcile there is an alien in it. So
Yeah.
he was sitting there and he was watching, he's really into it. And we got to the point where I had to leave, so I was going to visit a friend or something. This is like in high school. And I'm like, Dad, you want me to turn it off? And he was like, nah, stupid, but leave it on. And he sat and watched the whole thing right to the end because he was interested in the movie. It got him. But that's about as close I ever got him to getting into anything really nerdy. So. All right, well, that's cool. Right on. So well, it makes sense, I guess. Like, do you feel like, okay, well, I guess getting to the subject matter of Box Office Poison, were they like were the characters all analogs to people you knew, or is it just sort of mismatches of different people in your life? Or
None of them were direct. I mean, the closest one is probably the character Ed, who was physically and circumstantially was at least a jumping off point for Ed. I think what I would do is I would tend to almost like use someone I knew as kind of like an initial kind of starting point. But then as I worked with them, the characters would go in different places that their inspirations were not,
okay.
Would not do. And so, but it generally, I never thought of it really in terms of like, oh, this, other than Tony being Ed, I've never thought of any of their characters. Oh, yeah, this is this other roommate of mine, and this is this person, and
Yeah.
all of the rest of them were kind of just mashups of a lot of different people.
But a great, I think anyone that's had a circle of friends, especially that time in their life, I guess the early 20s when you're figuring stuff out, that it's like a great mismatch of those type of people. I think everybody's had versions of those people in their lives. At
That's the
points.
beauty of the roommate situation is you sometimes wind up with people you would never socialize with generally, but for whatever reason,
for sure,
together.
So did any of your friends while this was becoming a thing, and getting noticed or some attention, did they start seeing themselves in the work? Were they looking for it, or were they aware that it was just something that was?
No one has ever admitted as much to me, but so at one point, one of my later books, a friend of mine, he had to tip his hat to me because he could see aspects of him and another friend of ours, but I had kind of like swapped some of their attributes. Like the one who was neat in real life, I made him the slob, but he was also the one who enjoyed playing Warhammer. And so,
Yeah.
so neither of them was the exact analog of the other. It was almost like they got into the transporter together and then got separated, and they had mixed together. And they were like half each other,
You two Vix them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So like, I guess dealing with the themes of that book itself, and the books themselves are, well, this one, I guess, since we're on the box office poison, was like so mired in like relationships, interpersonal relationships, and all the issues like that come with it.
Mhm.
Do you feel that the most of the conflict between your characters, like mining it in that way with relationships specifically, like, because it seems to be a lot of your stuff centers around people that are romantically intertwined that might not necessarily be the best suits for each other as time
Yeah.
goes on. So I mean, is that something you feel like may have come from a house of divorce, or just from your own experiences of relationships not working out, or is it just something that you it seems like a theme you come back to a lot? So I'm just curious as to why you that is.
It wasn't something I was consciously like, oh, this is replicating something in my own life. I mean, I was in my 20s at the time, and
Mhm.
having my first serious relationship, and so it was kind of, and I'd never really written any stories before, so you're just going to write about whatever your I don't know, concerns are in your
Mhm.
life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fair.
As almost like a self therapy kind of process or whatever. So
Well, that's art.
I
That's what it is.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I did, when I set out to do the story, I did say, well, I wanted to um I'd come up with the characters and then started writing stories about them. And then after about 60 pages of that, I was like, okay, now I know what the overall, now that I know them well enough, now I know I can come up with overall arcs for them
Mm.
and know how they're going to end, and then start working towards that, And
Yeah.
so if you look at the book, the first 60 pages are really just kind of plotless, like self-contained little short stories, which is
Mhm.
me basically educating myself as to who these characters were. And so that was enough time, I guess, for me to at least have their bases from that. So I wanted to do two people who got into bad relationships, and one of them stuck with the bad relationship, and one of them left the bad relationship. So
Mm.
that was kind of the overall roadmap I wanted to use. So I knew they were going to be bad relationships, even though it wasn't anything to do with what I was experiencing at the
Mm.
time.
I like
Um,
that the take on it, especially like how like you rectify some of the stories, or at least the idea that they're bad. You just catch up with the bad relationship down the line, and you're like, well, they're still together, and they don't necessarily seem
yeah,
happy, but they're still. And like everybody knows couples like that, like people you may have known, and then you're like, you run into them and they're still holding on, and you're like, but whatever, it's their
you never
thing,
know.
but you never
Yeah.
know. So I like that. I also find it interesting in your style, and I'm assuming this is a conscious choice, but obviously when you do books where it's a lot of it's not a superhero book, you can't have a conversation while you're fighting a giant robot.
Mhm.
You seem to like always when there are important conversations going on, you usually find some kind of a something to be going on, like people are playing a video game, or in one particular instance, two people are having sex for like 4 pages. We're having a big
Yeah.
conversation. So like it's interesting ways of finding a way to make the visuals interesting while they're having conversations instead of just talking heads.
Yeah,
Um,
my comics have a lot of people having conversations in diners. Is kind of it's almost like
yeah,
Seinfeld in that way.
yeah,
It's a lot of so trying to make it visually interesting for the reader and for myself, you just gotta try to mix stuff in. And if you can add another layer to the story by having the visual somehow connect with what is being talked about thematically, then all the better.
and
So
I guess the final box office poison to put a tick on that. I mean, the character of Irving, like obviously you had a reverence for superhero comics by including that character in it. But his voice particularly as I can assume based on the way he's depicted and some of the things in the story about who he's based on. I assume he's kind of a mismatch of a few people, but like I
I can
guess.
tell you, the real person is deceased. So,
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, you actually knew it.
yeah.
I just assumed it was like a Jack Kirby analog, or Stanley Jack
Uh,
Kirby
no, it
analog
was
somehow.
when I was at SVA, Gene Colan was one of my teachers
Oh,
there,
really? Wow. Okay.
and
That's
he was a very very bitter about the kind of the business. He was very kind of like not bitter exactly, but he was very no nonsense. Like there was no romanticizing this as a
really.
job. It was just like it's all about, you know, are you good enough to get a job at Marvel or DC? If you're not, then that's what you should, like,
But
I
was
remember
he? No, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yep.
yeah, I remember at one point I was like, I was very sassy as it, I'm like, well, what about books like Love and Rockets? And he was like, I don't know what that is, like, and so, he was definitely of a different generation, and the alternative comic scene that was like, why would that be something you'd even like? You want to do something where you don't make any money, you're paying to go to art school to do something that doesn't pay you any money to do. Why are you doing this? So yeah, it was a combination of him and probably, but also at the time, the Marvel Jack Kirby incident.
Mm.
I'd read a lot of comics history stuff because the Comics Journal used to do a lot of interviews with people who had been through all that stuff, and so I kind of got a master's education in comics history by reading all those interviews. But yes, the Jack Kirby thing was very recent in the news, and so that was a big influence on it. That was an influence on it, but his personality was more Gene Colan.
Was Colin bitter, like about how he was remembered in the industry, or like felt like the things that he contributed were he wasn't getting the proper compensation for them, or is it just?
We never really got into it. He never really I remember telling one of the other teachers, I said, oh, he seems like he's an angry guy. And he said, oh, that Colin was going through some like personal difficulties at the time, which might have contributed to his,
No, maybe so.
his unhappiness.
Well, that's interesting. That's really funny because you get that whole like "don't meet your heroes" vibe a little bit throughout that whole story. I mean, obviously, it's great to meet the people that, but anybody who's met any comic person over the years, especially an older type. I remember meeting Neil Adams just at a con, and I remember thinking like, "Whoa, this guy, it's a whole other world." And it's like and Colin, I guess, would be the same from that like this is a job. It's not, it's almost like it's weird I don't know if they couldn't enjoy themselves creatively or they didn't have that in them, but like to do such a creative thing, to create these characters and tell these stories, but not get to enjoy the artisticness of it and just see it as a job seems really sad to me.
I mean, yeah, that's life. I mean,
Yeah, I suppose.
I guess it probably beats, working in a warehouse,
Yeah, fair enough.
So like, you're like,
Fair
well, I'm
enough.
not doing what I love. Yeah. It does make you wonder what some of these people would have done. What
Yeah.
would Kurt Swan have done if he had his druthers and could have drawn anything he wanted?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting, I guess, But like just reading, I talked to on the show every once in a while about that Stan Lee biopic book that came out a while ago by Abraham Riesling, the True Believer one, where they're just talking about like what it was like in the Marvel bullpen where like, Jack Kirby's slaving away in his office and Stan Lee's playing his flute, dancing around and like just, like throwing ideas at him. And he's just like, shooting them off because he doesn't want anything to do with them. Like, it just seems like this weird, like, it seems like the Daily Bugle from Spider-Man, but with people making comics, just like this people just pumping out content and sitting at their desks with the little ties around their arms and the little green thing over the visor. And that was it.
That's really the image that Stanley sold.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yes. He certainly was a great carnival barker for comics is what I often describe him as. Cool. Well then, so I guess you mentioned that the Wizard article is sort of what got Box Office Poison to the forefront, and I assume you saw a big spike in sales after that. Was that the one that sort of
not a big spike in sales enough where they were like, okay, we'll keep publishing.
Publishing. Okay, cool.
So I'm not like, it's not like it made me rich or anything like that. So,
but kept it going.
Yeah, it was enough to keep me going, and then eventually, once I got to the end of the story, I kind of I pulled the plug on it. I said, okay, I don't want to do. They were like, oh, we kind of want you to come up with a new story or keep going with the same characters and stuff. But I'd always had a big, an ending in mind from there. So, and by the end, I was like, I want to do different characters and so on. So
Awesome.
moving.
So was it basically the relationship was struck because after that you went on to do, was it Tricked was next?
Yeah. Well, towards the end of Box Office Poison, I'd become acquainted with Chris Staros, who at the time was just starting. Him and his partner Brett Warnock had just started Top Shelf Publications, and they were kind of starting up, and they were looking for talent and whatever. And I said, oh, I really want to do a collection of my. He'd read my Box Office Poison, liked it, and I said, I really want to do a collection. And he said, oh, well, how about we do the collection? And I said, also, what would it be like the first 6 issues together? And he's like, no, do the whole 21 issues or whatever in one big book, which at the time was a very rare thing. There were very few books of that size, that in that style. Nowadays it's a lot more of a common thing, but so they did it, and I think that helped to get the book more noticed, because a book that people had never heard of that was 600 pages long was an unusual hook for people. So
yeah, it definitely stood out on the shelf. I remember, as a looking at the regular comics and seeing the indie section, usually never had a book that large on it. So
yeah,
and it's as a kid trying to read, or as anyone trying to get into an independent comic, you flip through it and you like what you see, and to have the whole story in one sitting and not have to keep coming back for more. I mean,
yeah,
it's very appealing, I find anyway. Awesome.
So Top Shelf. Oh, sorry, I was
keep
going. But
you're right. You're going.
Well, yeah. So Top Shelf at that time was mostly interested in doing graphic novels, not serialized books. So when I signed up to do my second book with them, they were like, no floppies this time. You're just going to wait and come out with it in one shot. So it'll be all new material that will create more of a marketing buzz about it. And I was like, well, I figured I was a graphic novelist, so that's kind of what I would do. But ultimately, I'm not sure. It's very lonely doing it that way, because it'll take you 2-3 years to do a book, and so at that time, no one sees what you're working on. It's so and you're very
I was going to ask that, because your books always seems like something comes out, you disappear for 4 or 5 years, and then we see something new. So you're not very active online promoting it. I guess is that specifically by design by the publisher, because they want to just let it stew and then build up people's desire for it, or just make it a totally new thing, so you don't see anything along the journey?
Well, the years I was mostly active were social media wasn't as much of a thing
fair enough,
online.
Yeah.
There was like the Comics Journal message board, and it was still early on. You know what I mean? My first book came out in 2000. My second one came out in 2005. So this is really before people had smartphones even,
right.
You know what I mean? And so, and then I was working on a book, and it took me a long time. I had a false start. And then by the time I was done with it, I was like Rip Van Winkle. Like the industry had totally changed. Like all the comic conventions I knew had totally, like the whole, and the style that people were interested in had kind of changed. It had kind of, there was a much more of a manga influence on stuff. And I think my stuff really fell into the, once again, not quite mainstream, not quite like cool alternative comics. It's not, they're not arty. They're very plot driven. And anyway, so so it just became really hard to market my book. You know what I mean? I have a podcast that's popular. I have, I was on Twitter and would announce it and stuff like that, but you're just competing with so much, for eyeballs that it's really tough to, unless you have a kind of push behind you. It's tough to let people know you have a new project out, and then it comes out and then it just disappears like 2 weeks later. The people who are interested buy it, and then it's, lost in the ether. So it's
well, that's true. I guess it's so much build up towards something that is just, it's like Christmas, you wait for a while, you get your presents in, and then half an hour later you forget about it, move on with your life.
Yeah, but I remember when I did Too Cool to Be Forgotten, or one of my books, I would go to San Diego Comic-Con, the book would be debuting. Oh, it's so exciting, people are buying it. They're and literally the next day people were like, oh, I went home and I read it yesterday. what are you working on now? And I'm like, that's it. You sit with it for 6 hours, and it was like 4 years of my life that was in that. And so, it's a
You're right.
it's
I
a
guess fandom's like, well, what next? What next? Like, where,
yeah,
give
it's a
us more.
humbling experience.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's
that's
great that
also
they want it, but yeah,
oh
you're
yeah,
right.
totally. I'm not, I'm flattered that they're even interested, but I think that's also that possibly is the drawback to not serializing, is that there you're kind of forcing people to slow down and read it a chunk at a time rather than just sitting down go to the bathroom in one sitting and read the whole 200-page book.
Well, I feel like as a creator, to me, it seems like it would be better in the way that you can tell it all in one story, and then you don't. There's no people waiting, right? Like every month with their hand out to be like, "Where's the next one?" And then I'm sure in those instances, there's sometimes because of life or whatever, you need to rush to get them done, and maybe the quality wouldn't be quite. At least this way, you can take your time and really tell the full story that you want to tell.
Yeah, it's there's pros and cons to both
I suppose,
formats, but yeah.
Did you ever have a desire to do like a mainstream book or anything on that level, like that in that style, and do it that way?
Gradually over the course of my career, a couple of times mainstream comics have approached me and said, "Oh, if you're interested," mostly about writing. They've never approached me about art. It's always been about writing.
Yeah.
I've always been kind of like,
I wouldn't take it personally. They have a very like do you know who David Cutler is? He's an artist from Marvel. It's okay, no worries. He's an artist from Marvel, and he was my roommate in school way back.
Oh, wow.
Actually, he was in university when I was in high school, and he was my roommate after he graduated, and I'd come to university. But we worked together at a store that sold comics, which is where I read that Wizard Guide and all that sort of stuff. He draws for Marvel now. But like he's a very talented artist, and we had a great long discussion when he's on the show about the rejections he got about there's a very certain specific box you need to fit in, and the way you need to be able to tell things for the big companies to even look at you to do art, and it's boring. I don't know. It's like there's room for everything. To me, why not?
What the fans want. It's
what
the fans want.
Well, with your style too, I always really liked is you none of your. There's a real impetus in a book like yours, I would guess, to make everyone incredibly pretty. And I'm not saying your characters are ugly, but they look like humans. They look like real human people. Like even like the attractive girl that might draw a guy's attention isn't necessarily like a model. She might be slightly heavier, but there's something about her and the way she's depicted that makes her alluring, and you can see why the character would fall for her. So like I always appreciated that about your style, and I'm assuming that's a conscious choice as well, is to show more human bodies in your work instead of idealized versions, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's where my style having a kind of cartoony influence can help, because I feel like turning down the realism a bit in favor of more different shapes and different types of faces. I know it's just more things to play with, and different, makes the characters distinctive by having, at one point I had two characters and I changed one of their hair colors, and I'm like, well, because I need to have them distinguish these two characters, definitely distinguished from each other, where, that's something that's harder to do when everyone kind of looks relatively realistic. And
yeah, it's not even about the realism. It's just like, some of your characters are kind of dumpy. Some of them are, even like the guy that's kind of handsome is kind of a bit of a pot belly on him. Like it's just real life. It's what people look like in real life. True. So something like that I appreciate, because it's just, you don't see that depicted in comics, even in talking like comics like yours that are about real life subjects. They even seem to be, most books, they still draw them all impossibly attractive. Like everyone's a model. And it's like, I mean,
it's
not how life works.
I've really experimented with being like, can I have a character who is genuinely ugly in the book, like in a story? And there's always an unconscious, softening over time, because you're drawing them over and over and over again. And when you draw an ugly person, it looks like a bad drawing. You know what I mean? So you want to tweak it a little bit so it looks a little bit better, but then you're totally going against what you're, you know what I mean? There's a kind of aesthetic ugliness, like Disney characters, the ugly ones are still, Quasimodo and the Hunchback is still has a kind of,
it's kind of glammed
aesthetic appeal. His lumps are kind of, I don't know, it's pleasing to the eye. It's not like you look at him and recoil in horror, the way you did with like with a more, I don't know. Anyway,
I'd like to see a version of that Disney movie where they actually make him repulsive, like utterly repulsive. If anything, it would probably hit the theme home a lot easier than it would when he's still kind of handsome in a weird way. You know?
Yeah, I mean, Beauty and the Beast, same thing. He's like a giant lion. You know, he's not like monstrous. He's like a, you know,
there's a very
furry.
dedicated online community that would be very attracted to a real life version of that character.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. He's powerful. He's strong. Yeah, he's regal looking. Yeah, he's rich. I used to. I always bring up that scene in the movie where they find the part of the castle where all the furniture's ripped up and broken, where he just like beasts it out when he was angry. And I'm like, aren't all the furniture people? Are those all corpses that are just like in that room? Yeah, that was Bill. He just was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now he's
They should have shown that room when the spell broke, and they showed it turns into limbs and people laying there.
They're all just dead body. He just like kind of like just keep that one closed. Well, yeah, so several books have come out since then. So Tricked, and which was a very interesting book in its own right as well, and some of the other ones along, and your most recent one, of course, being the Ever Expanding Universe, which of all your books probably spoke to me the most, because I'm right at that sweet spot in my life where all my friends are having babies. I don't. Me and my wife do not have a child, and I don't think that's coming. So, but like that. I really feel isolated somewhat from my group of friends originally, because they all seem to be too tied up doing baby stuff now. And I feel like I've lost friends. Like they still see them, but you know, instead of every other weekend going to do something fun, it's like maybe every 6 months at a party or something. So
yeah, it definitely can change the dynamics of stuff. Yeah, a friend of mine recently had a kid, and I guess she's 3 years old now, and he's like, "Oh, we're thinking about having a second one," and I'm like, "Oh, cool," because you can't talk people out of it. I know that. And I'm just like, I think of this as like a summer romance. Like it's gonna end at some point. You know, I'm not expecting any long-term commitment out of this friendship. Like I know eventually he's gonna be like, "Oh man, I'm just too busy," or whatever. You know. So
I had one of our friends, and I don't think they listen to the show. I'm sure they don't, but so I won't name them. But they said we're sitting around at a campfire, and one of them said, "I just wish someone would have told me that having kids would be this hard." And I remember looking at her like dumbfoundedly, thinking, "Did you not think having children would be hard? Like, did you think it would be?" They're like, "I wish someone would have told me that I wouldn't get as much sleep and that it would be hard." And I was like. I just said, "Oh yeah," you know, but in my head I'm like dumbfounded that like, how do you not think raising a child is hard? You won't have time. Like it's like the one thing that you can almost be certain of. It's like it's just like, what did you think it would be easy? Like no, there's no way in your mind you could have thought that. It flabbergasted me.
Yeah,
So,
I feel the same way. It's not that I didn't know this. It's like I didn't believe it.
Exactly.
Way, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Or it's especially if you like have a dog or a pet like that requires attention. I don't know how you could think, oh, it's probably as easy as raising a dog. You know what I mean? And you can leave it home by itself for 6 hours alone and let it bark its head off, and no one cares. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So like it's baffling to me that people seem to go into this doing less research than, you know, if they were buying a jet ski or something like that. They're just kind of like,
that's true.
You know, if I don't like it, well,
yeah. You know, in that
especially
way,
nowadays when you know it's not just 18 years anymore, because they're going to move back home once they graduate from their expensive college.
Nobody can afford to live anywhere anymore. So
yeah, it's a lifetime commitment. It's more on the lifetime commitment now.
And people always assume it's like, what if your kid? Like people always assume it's like, well, what if your kid's an asshole? What if your kid gets knocked up at 12? What if your kid becomes a drug addict? What you can't know, like, who knows? Like, I hope it's all going to work out well, but you know, you can't get, exactly. It's rolling the dice.
Yeah.
But,
But fortunately for our species, people do irrationally have children. You know what I mean? Like, we would not be, if people were totally rational, there would be no more humans, because we'd all be like,
I think
that
we
looks
could
very
use
painful.
a few
They're
less.
gonna take all my food. That, you know, they're gonna. So
I think we could use a few less right now. So hopefully we can get.
It'll happen. It'll happen. Don't worry.
He said like me. I'm the same way. I had a
not far off.
Yeah, I don't have any kids, but I had a little brother with big brothers, big sisters, and he just turned 18. He's almost 19 now. So the program ends once they hit 18. So, but I still hang out with him occasionally. I took him to see a movie yesterday. And we were sitting at dinner and he was talking about something like, I don't know what it's going to be like when I hit this age. And I'm like, oh, the world won't be around by then. I said, most of it, maybe. Some of it. Hopefully the part you're in will still be around. But there'll be chunks that probably won't be. And he laughed because he has that kind of sense of humor. I probably rubbed off on him over the years, but just sort of that cynical worldview of that sort of thing. And the idea of bringing kids into that just seems, ugh.
I don't know how people do it. Like,
But
it's astonishing to me that but again, thank God people are irrational,
that's
because
true.
one of those kids is going to be the one who leads the rebellion against the AI. So
I hope so. There's a John Connor out there, and God love him. So I guess in delving with writing about what's going on in your life, and that being something that was big in your world at the time. It really, I mean, obviously, even with the title, it's kind of like our expanding universe. Everything just keeps expanding, and there's lots of comparisons to like the cosmic expansion of the universe. And I like the speech about rogue planets and that sort of thing, which seems like there are just certain entities out there which kind of parallel the character's journey that aren't really connected to anything and are just wildly roaming around doing their own thing, which seems very much like an analog for yourself and your character and me, and people like you, like me. I guess like kind of branching it out into a cosmic world, like into the world where like you're looking at things even bigger than just interpersonal relationships, kids, Earth, like is the existential something you dwell on and bleeds into your work as well, like that sort of dread that comes with contemplating the universe and what's beyond?
I would say it definitely is part of my personality.
Yeah, mine too. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, totally. I like, and I guess I recently came across a supposedly Buddhist saying, who knows where any of this stuff comes from. They said a person has two lives. They get the life they have, and then the life they have once they realize they only have one life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you get to a certain point where you're like, whoa, this is going really fast. And like, stuff that happened 20 years ago seems like it was really, like 9/11 seems like it was like 2 years ago. There's no reason to think the next 20 years are going to go by any slower than the last 20 years went. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So got to get going on this thing. You know what I mean? Anything you kind of want to, you got to prioritize and start thinking like, okay, party's going to be ending soon no matter what I do. So, I guess I think about that kind of stuff.
Oh, for sure. It makes you wonder if that's like, I don't really have any sort of a belief system, but you think like the only reason anything seems to have any meaning is the idea that it won't exist at some point. So like, it may be finite, and that may be where the meaning is found, I guess. But but you're right. If you didn't, like, you ever watch What We Do in the Shadows, like the show or the movie? So I was listening to an interview with Taika Waititi. I think it was on Mark Maron's podcast, and he was talking about how, like, in the movie he did, the original movie, the vampires are sort of vapid and like just lazy and never really do anything, because what's the point if you can live forever? Like, I might learn the violin someday. So like one of them's playing it, but he's not very good because he never bothers, because there's time and time. So like, how much would you really achieve if there's endless time? Probably nothing. I know, speaking for myself, I'd probably do nothing, but I'll get to it eventually.
Why do today what you could put off till tomorrow? So it's a different experience.
Awesome. Well, very cool. So what's next for you? What are you working on now, or can you talk about it, or is it going to come out 6 years from now and I'll read it then?
Well, it depends on your point of view. I've at this point I have no plans to do any more comics or graphic novels or anything. Yeah, I along the lines of what we just been discussing, I got to the point where I'm like, well, I've done these comics, and comics, has its rewards and stuff, but like, again, time's wasting. And if I ever want to explore any other kind of art, like I want to have a chance to do that. So basically now I'm kind of experimenting with a lot of different things. I think one of the things that it's frustrating about comics is that you have to keep cranking it out.
Mhm.
You have to draw the same characters over and over and over again. You have to do it fairly quickly if you
Mhm.
want to maintain any kind of schedule. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to do that. I want to draw things where every single line I am happy with, and it's and I've been doing that increasingly, and trying digital painting and other types of things, and I'm really enjoying it. And it's I find I'm still using comic storytelling in the drawings, even though they are like single still images.
Mhm.
Like if I have a crowd scene, when I'm drawing the people in the crowd, I make them all individuals, and in my as I'm drawing it in my head, I'm thinking about, oh, what is this character, how are they reacting to this scene, or what are
Mhm.
they thinking about?
Yeah, you're still building that story.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think that still satisfies that urge in me to kind of world build, I guess. So yeah, so I like creating art that is very detailed, and that you can stare at for a long time and see a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily, that you might miss on repeated glances.
So is there an end goal in mind, like an art book? Is that what the
I
end?
don't know. For now, I've been posting the stuff on my, I have a merch store on Threadless, and
Mhm. Oh,
people
cool.
can buy prints of my work or whatever there. And I'm still the idea of doing a book, or if I could come up with some kind of thematic unity, like thematic grouping of some of the art I've been doing. I would certainly like to do a book. I don't know how much market there would be for it or whatever, but I'm enjoying it. So, and
Very
so
cool.
yeah.
And there's no desire to go back to any sort of narrative storytelling in that way right now?
The idea of just drawing the same,
Just drawing for fun.
well, the other thing I've also wanted to do is write like stories, but with words as opposed to comics format.
Uh-huh.
So basically, I'm taking the two skills that use comics and separating them.
Oh,
I'm
okay, cool.
doing visual art, and then I'm gonna experiment with trying to just tell stories using words. And so I do come up with stories, but most of them aren't things that are like something I would want to draw repeatedly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Most of the stories, like we said, are like our interpersonal
Mhm.
relationships and things like that, which can be very boring to draw.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas I love drawing fantasy monsters and science fiction-y type stuff, but I don't enjoy writing that type of stuff. So it's a paradox there.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm looking forward to
So
seeing whatever those projects come to fruition. That's awesome.
thanks.
Very cool. And one thing I wanted to mention is I think it's on one of your bios. It mentions that one of the people you learned under was Will Eisner. How much was that?
Correct.
How was he to work with or to learn from, I guess?
Yeah, he was at the time one of the teachers at the School of Visual Arts. He was one of
Mhm.
the non-superhero teachers who
I still
they
find it
had
so
on staff.
surreal that there's like superhero teachers. Like I've never gone to an art school, and I wish I
Yeah.
had now. Especially speaking to people like you, like the idea that there's like classes. There's like here's your superhero class, and here's your other stuff class. Like that just sounds so cool and great to me. I get in practice, like anything, it's not as cool once you're doing it, I guess. But like the
Yeah.
idea of it just seems so cool to me.
Well, at the time, doing superhero comics was loathsome to me, so
Yeah.
I did not enjoy that part of it, because I'm
Yeah.
like, I want to do alternative. I was very much in the rebellious kind of. So yeah. Well, speaking of which, Will Eisner, he was a great teacher.
Mhm.
He was very open minded and very smart guy, and if you know his career, he really managed it well, and managed to one of the few cartoonists who managed to do their career in such a way where they managed to actually make money from it.
Yeah.
But yeah, he would only come up once every other week. He lived in Florida, and the school paid to have him come up every other Thursday to teach the class.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, he was a great guy. He was like I said, at the time, I was kind of a rebellious jerk, and so
Even with Will Eisner, my God. Yeah.
What can I tell you?
I'm a rebel,
but
man.
But to his credit, he was a very we would engage him in like discussions about comics, and he would be like, come up with a kind of rule of thumb. Like his rule of thumb was like, anytime you turn the page, the top image, the first image people see should be reorienting reorienting the reader as to where they are. Because in the turn page, like, you can't trust that they're going to remember that or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can see that. But at the time I argued, and I still argue, that that should not be a hard and fast rule that's,
no,
I think of plenty of storytelling choices where you wouldn't want necessarily an establishing shot as the first things people see. In fact, I would say the opposite sometimes. I would say that's where you want a shock, because when people turn the page, they're like, dong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, he would indulge us in these discussions, and was always very good natured about it. And he seemed like he was, really enjoyed doing it. So he was fun to do. And it's funny because now I get, not that I get asked about it all the time, but when I went to France for some comics thing, people were like, "Oh, Will Eisner," and to me, he was just like some teacher I had, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like I didn't revere him at the time. I was just like, he was just another one of my instructors. So,
well, I mean, there are other people listed that are
on now than I was at the time. I was 20 years old.
Yeah. I guess time adds to that. Well, I mean, there are other people listed like Carmine Infantino, which is cool, and other people like that. So, but I just saw his name, obviously, because in comic circles, he's like the guy. So, especially if you have a reverence for the graphic storytelling, not just comics. Like, he really built comics as what we know them today. So,
and the great part is non-comics people, if you say, "Oh yeah, I studied under Will Eisner," they're like, "Wow," because they think it's Michael Eisner.
Oh,
Disney executive, so they don't know who Will Eisner is.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, me and Bob Iger used to hang out and just have a cigar, and that's cool. Well, I look forward to seeing the book maybe and other stuff that comes out from your work. And so it's on Threadless. People can check out and buy those sort of things from
my website, alexrobinson.fun. There you'll find links to my comics, to my merch store, anything you want, my podcasts, all that stuff that you would be interested to know about me.
Are you is your podcast still active now?
Yeah, I do a podcast called Star Wars Minute, where my friend and I go through the Star Wars movies minute at a time. I
didn't know about this. So what was the impetus for that? Before I let you go, I should go into this because it's a really cool idea. What was the impetus for that?
My friend Pete, he worked at a comic book store. I was a cartoonist, obviously. So eventually our social circles crossed, and we both discovered we could talk about Star Wars endlessly. And I had him on my previous podcast, The Ink Panthers. And so there was another podcast called Mission Logs, which was basically a podcast where they would go through Star Trek one episode at a time. And he was like, "We should do something like that, but for Star Wars, but we can't do one episode at a time. There's only 6 movies."
Because you're gonna have infinite content now. You'll never end. You'll be doing this for eternity.
Yes. And so Pete then came up with the insane genius idea of dividing up into 1 minute chunks. And
well, at least the research is easy,
Yeah, I mean,
you watch a minute.
Yeah, but then we have to do research and
of course,
do some it turned out to be a in a way, that kind of allowed me to quit comics, because like I was more successful as a podcaster than I was, I made more as a podcaster than I ever made doing comics. So there was a lot less impetus to kind of keep
Do you have any kind of an interactive element with the fandom itself? Like, or is it just you put out your show? And because I mean, I do this one, and I also do one with someone else in which we watch the X-Men cartoon from the '90s, and we go through every episode of that. We've had people from like voice actors and writers and animators on the show as well. But we've reached the end of it, so now we're waiting for the new Disney Plus show whenever that comes. And we decided, I had a genius idea. I wish I had something simpler like you did, or your friend came up with, but to say, well, let's just do the movies. So now for every podcast, I need to watch a full X-Men movie again. We just started. We did that. That's why I brought it up earlier, from like the things in the '90s you had that were comics. One was that Generation X made for TV movie, and then the other. Now we're on X-Men 1. So you're like,
I encourage you to consider examining it 1 minute at a time.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Currently over 200 by minute podcasts, people who were inspired by our show. And
really, so you guys were the first.
Well, technically, there was a show called Gutter Balls, which broke down Big Lebowski minute by minute. but we were unaware
Oh,
of
wow.
that when it started. We do acknowledge that they were before us. We didn't know about it before we started, and it was the shows that followed were largely our result of our kind
Yeah.
of inspired by our thing.
Well,
So
it's a great
we
idea, I guess.
popularized. I'd say we popularized it. That's what I'd say.
Oh no, it's a fantastic
Um,
idea because speaking as a big Lebowski fan, I'm interested in that
mhm.
one. But even like anything, like if you're a big fan of something, you want to, like you mentioned, you just want more of it. And now in the world we
Yeah,
have, you can just sit in it as
yeah,
long as you possibly, want. So with shows like that, like you can really just, I mean, find your community. It's so nuts
yeah,
to me to think about like just talking about when we were younger, if you want to talk to someone about your comic, you had to find some guy that read it and then talk to him about it. Now with the
yeah,
internet, like you can find your community and just sit in that, which is it's so great, and also it's a double edged sword. If you're a crazy backwards racist type, you can find your community as well, and they'll make you feel better or make you feel
yeah,
like you're right about your backwards opinions. But you can also
yeah,
find a community, of comic friends and nerds, and just sit in your love of nerddom for
yeah.
forever, 1 minute at a time.
It's a different world. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah,
everyone should go to moviesbyminutes.com. There's a complete list of all of and I think someone might have done the X-Men, but there have been some doubles. So if you want to jump in,
uh,
um, so yeah.
oh, that's amazing. Well, definitely everyone listening should check that out. I know I will be. That sounds like a blast. So, what minute are you on now?
Well, we just finished up Rise of Skywalker. So we've just finished up the last movie. You caught us when we're up to date and have
Really?
no new material on the horizon.
Did you do
So
like Rogue One and all those ones too? You guys
we
like,
did, yeah, we did them all
Mike?
release order.
How often does your show come out?
We did it well. We kind of do when the show is on, when the season starts, we do 5 episodes a week, 1 minute per
Oh,
episode.
okay. Well, yeah,
So
I can
we
see you get through it
basically
faster that way.
it goes through like, I don't know how many months that is, but and then we take time off and then start the second one and so on.
Awesome.
So we just finished Rise of Skywalker, and we're about to do our victory lap and redo the most recent version of the original Star Wars, the one that's on Disney Plus. So
Oh, okay.
which is called the McClunk. We call it the McClunky edition because that's the final. I'm sure you and your audience know about that edition by George Lucas. But
Right.
so
Did you do the holiday
anyway,
special? I'd love to hear that one.
we did a live show about the holiday special at Christmas
Beautiful.
time. So we've done
Ah,
in one of the Ewok movies. We reviewed Boba Fett and Ahsoka and the Mandalorian, and not
wow.
1 minute at a time. Those were just episode by
Mhm.
episode. So yeah. So to answer your question though, we do engage with fandom. We have a Patreon. We have the Discord, and we're involved in that. We used to have a Facebook group, but once it still exists, but we had to take our politics ruined it.
Mm.
So
Yeah, that tends to ruin everything.
yeah, I spent a lot of time policing people's posts, and I'm like, this is no fun. I don't want to be, you know. So anyway, yeah. So with the Discord, it's a smaller group, so it's easier to monitor. So.
Yeah, and also the type of people that go on there to just spread hate speech or whatever opinions they have
Yeah,
probably
totally.
wouldn't
Yeah.
bother going to Discord to do it, so that's way too
Yeah,
much work.
totally.
So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, that's cool. I'm excited to. I'm gonna have to tune into this because this. I have heard of this. I think when I was doing a bit of research before the show. But no, that sounds like a totally fun podcast. So I'm checking that out as well.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for being on, Alice. I can't thank
My
you
pleasure.
enough. Like I said, I'm a big fan, and it's very cool to get to know you. So thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, have a great one.
Bye.
Bye bye. There it is, my talk with Alex Robinson. A fantastic conversation with a super cool guy. And as I said before, kind of a kindred spirit, I mean, as nerds, we do meet a lot of people that have similar interests to us, but you don't always gel with them on a level that really makes for an engaging and interesting conversation every time. I like to think that I've been doing this long enough that I can have a fun talk with almost anybody, hopefully. I have yet to push the boundary and find a difficult guest. Hopefully the day never comes. But if it does, I will be ready for it. But, I mean, as far as having engaging chats with people that I really seem to link with on a level, Alex was one of them, which is really reaffirming in that his work meant so much to me, still does, as I grew up.
And this theme spoke to me that it's cool to get to know the real person behind it and get to know that, he and I are on a similar wavelength. I mean, I don't know if he feels that way, but I certainly did. And I'm looking forward to checking out his Star Wars series as well. That podcast series sounds like a ton of fun and right up my alley. So I'm very excited for that. I'm also excited for our next episode, which will be in 1 week's time, next Monday, in which I chat with a gentleman who also had a comic that meant a lot to me growing up, because it was a super fun little indie comic that I used to read a lot growing up. I only had a few issues, but man, oh man, it had a great effect. It was the Mr. Monster comic, and I'm going to be talking to Michael T. Gilbert, the creator of that comic book. Super fun chat, really cool guy, and also a guy that I had a really great conversation with. So that episode drops next week. In the meantime, I hope you have a great week. I hope you are as excited as I am about the change in format once again to a weekly format. And I also would love to hear from you. Please drop me a message, drop me a letter, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. And just pass it along. I mean, I'm out there kind of banging the drum, but I'd love to be able to get this podcast into more ears so that people can hear these conversations and get to know these creators. Well, certainly ones that had a huge effect on me growing up and to this very day. And I hope for you as well. So, stay safe, have fun, and I will catch you in 1 week's time. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.